The jury's eyes were fixed on the small figure in the center of the courtroom. 7-year-old Emma Whitmore sat motionless in her chair, clutching a worn-out rag doll with only one button eye. Her father, billionaire CEO Richard Whitmore, sat behind her, his jaw clenched tight. Across the aisle sat his ex-wife Victoria, draped in designer clothes and cold arrogance. The judge leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Emma, sweetheart, the court needs to hear from you. Who do you want to live with, your mother or your father?" The entire room held its breath, but Emma didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't make a single sound. She hadn't spoken a word since the day she was born. But what happened next would shake the foundations of this family's darkest secrets. Because somewhere in that courtroom sat a 12-year-old girl in second-hand clothes, a girl nobody thought mattered, a girl who was about to do the unbelievable. 3 years earlier, Richard Whitmore was at the peak of his success. His technology empire spanned continents. His face graced the covers of business magazines. He had everything a man could want: private jets, mansions, influence. But none of it mattered, because his only child, Emma, had never called him Daddy. She had never called anyone anything. Emma was born on a cold February night, and when the doctors handed her to her mother, Victoria, she didn't cry. At first, they thought it was a blessing. Such a peaceful baby, they said. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Emma remained silent. No cooing, no babbling, not even a whimper when she was hungry. She communicated only through her enormous gray eyes, eyes that seemed to hold a universe of unspoken words. Richard took her to every specialist money could buy: neurologists, audiologists, speech therapists. They came from New York, from London, from Tokyo. They ran every test imaginable. Her hearing was perfect. Her brain scans were normal. There was no physical reason for her silence. One doctor finally gave them a name for it: selective mutism, complicated by what he believed was severe emotional trauma rooted in early childhood experiences. But Richard refused to believe it. His daughter wasn't traumatized. She was loved. She was protected. She had everything. Yet she lived in a world of silence, locked away somewhere he couldn't reach. Victoria, Emma's mother, was not what she appeared to be. To the public, she was the elegant wife of a billionaire, a woman who sat on charity boards and wore designer gowns to galas. But behind closed doors, she was ice. She had married Richard for his money, and when she discovered that pregnancy would trap her in a life she secretly resented, something inside her hardened. She never hurt Emma, not in ways that left marks. But she ignored her. When Emma reached for her mother, Victoria would look away. When Emma cried silently in her crib, Victoria would shut the door. And when the doctors explained that emotional neglect in infancy could cause lasting psychological damage, Victoria scoffed and blamed the nannies. Richard didn't see it at first. He was too busy building his empire. But slowly, he began to notice the coldness, the empty eyes Victoria had when she looked at their daughter. And when Emma was 3 years old, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He filed for divorce. The court battle was brutal. Victoria didn't want Emma, everyone knew that, but she wanted Richard's money, and Emma was her bargaining chip. She hired the most ruthless lawyers, dragged the proceedings out for years, and made Richard's life a living nightmare. And through it all, little Emma remained silent, watching the two adults who were supposed to protect her tear each other apart. By the time Emma was 4, Richard had won primary custody. Victoria got visitation rights and a settlement that would make most people faint. But she wasn't satisfied. She never was. And so she waited, plotting, looking for any opportunity to regain control. Meanwhile, Richard did everything he could to help Emma. He brought in the best therapists. He read books on child psychology. He spent every spare moment with her, talking to her, even though she never responded, reading her stories, even though she never laughed at the funny parts. He introduced her to music, to art, to nature. He would take her on walks through the garden, pointing at flowers and butterflies, hoping something would spark a response. Sometimes, late at night, Richard would sit by Emma's bed and whisper, "I know you're in there, sweetheart, and when you're ready to come out, I'll be here." Emma would look at him with those ancient, knowing eyes, and she would blink. That was all. Just a blink. But Richard clung to it like a lifeline. The Whitmore estate was vast, 40 acres of manicured gardens, a private lake, and a mansion that could house a small village. It required a large staff to maintain, and that staff was overseen by a woman named Margaret Chen. Margaret was in her 50s, stern but fair, and she had worked for wealthy families her entire life. She lived in a small cottage at the edge of the property with her granddaughter, Lily. Lily Chen was 12 years old, with long black hair that she usually wore in a simple ponytail and hands that were always busy, mending clothes, folding laundry, helping her grandmother however she could. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 7, and Margaret had taken her in without hesitation. They weren't rich. They didn't have much. But they had each other, and that was enough. Lily had never been to the main house. Her grandmother had strict rules about that. "We are the help," Margaret would say. "We do our job, we don't cause trouble, and we keep to ourselves." Lily understood. She went to the public school in town, wore hand-me-down clothes, and spent her free time reading books she borrowed from the library. She was invisible, and she had learned to be okay with that. But everything changed one rainy afternoon in October. Lily was walking home from school when she heard it, a small, muffled sound coming from the old greenhouse at the edge of the estate. The greenhouse had been abandoned for years, its glass panels cracked, its interior overgrown with wild roses and forgotten dreams. No one ever went there, but someone was there now. Lily hesitated. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay out of trouble. Mind your own business." But the sound came again, and this time Lily recognized it. It was the sound of someone crying, not with voice, but with breath. Silent sobs. She pushed open the rusted door, and there, huddled among the wild roses, was a little girl with gray eyes and trembling hands. Lily had never seen Emma Whitmore up close. She knew the stories, of course. Everyone in town knew about the silent daughter of the billionaire. But seeing her now, so small, so fragile, so utterly alone, Lily felt something shift inside her chest. "Hey," Lily said softly, crouching down so she wasn't towering over the child. "Are you okay?" Emma didn't respond. She didn't even look up. Lily sat down on the dirty floor, ignoring the mud on her only good skirt. She didn't say anything else. She just sat there, a quiet presence, letting Emma know she wasn't alone. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20, and then, slowly, Emma lifted her head. She looked at Lily with those enormous gray eyes, and something flickered in them, not fear, not sadness, but curiosity, recognition, something. Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn paperback book. It was her favorite, a story about a girl who could talk to animals, who saved her village from a terrible drought by befriending a magical fish. The cover was falling apart, the pages were yellow, but Lily loved it more than anything she owned. "Do you like stories?" Lily asked softly. Emma blinked. Lily took that as a yes. She opened the book to the first page and began to read aloud. In a village where rain had forgotten how to fall, there lived a girl named May who had a secret. She read for an hour. She read until her throat was dry and the rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was streaming through the cracked glass panels. And the whole time, Emma sat perfectly still, listening. When Lily finally closed the book, Emma did something unexpected. She reached out and touched the cover, just a brush of her fingers against the worn edges. But it was the first time Emma had reached out to anyone in years. "I have to go," Lily said gently, "but I can come back tomorrow, if you want." Emma didn't nod, she didn't shake her head, but she also didn't look away. Lily took that as a yes, too. What began as a chance encounter became a secret ritual. Every afternoon, Lily would sneak to the abandoned greenhouse, and Emma would be waiting. Lily would read to her stories about brave girls and talking animals and magical lands where anything was possible. Sometimes she would bring wildflowers she picked from the meadow. Sometimes she would bring stale crackers she saved from her school lunch, and slowly, gradually, Emma began to change. She started to sit closer to Lily. She would lean against her shoulder while listening. Once, when Lily was reading a particularly scary part, Emma actually clutched Lily's sleeve. It was small, almost nothing, but to Lily it was a miracle. She never told anyone, not her grandmother, not the teachers at school, not anyone. This was their secret, hers and Emma's, a fragile, precious thing that existed outside the world of money and status and judgment. But secrets have a way of coming out. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into their routine, a shadow fell across the greenhouse door. Lily looked up, her heart hammering, and saw Richard Whitmore standing there. For a moment no one moved. Richard stared at his daughter, sitting in the dirt of an abandoned greenhouse, leaning against a girl he didn't recognize. Lily stared at him, terrified. She was going to be fired. Her grandmother was going to be fired. They were going to be homeless, all because she couldn't mind her own business. But then Richard did something she didn't expect. He knelt down. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Peace. His daughter looked peaceful. "You're Margaret's granddaughter," Richard said quietly. His voice was rough, unsteady. Lily nodded, unable to speak. Richard turned to Emma. "Sweetheart, is she your friend?" Emma did something she had never done before. She nodded. Richard's eyes filled with tears. After that day, everything changed. Richard didn't banish Lily from the property. Instead, he invited her to the main house. He asked her to spend time with Emma, officially, openly. He wanted to understand what magic this girl possessed that had reached his daughter when nothing else could. Lily was nervous at first. The mansion was overwhelming, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and rooms bigger than her grandmother's entire cottage. But Emma was there, and Emma made her feel brave. She continued to read to Emma. She taught her simple games, patty cake, cat's cradle, tic-tac-toe. She brought her grandmother's old music box and let Emma wind it up to hear the tinkly melody. And slowly, other things began to happen. Emma started to hum. The first time it happened, Lily thought she imagined it. They were sitting in the garden, and she was braiding clover into a crown when she heard it. A soft, almost inaudible sound. A tune. The melody from the music box. Lily froze. She looked at Emma. Emma was looking at the sky, her lips parted slightly, the faintest vibration in her throat. She was humming. Lily didn't say anything. She didn't want to startle her, but she took Emma's hand and squeezed it gently, and Emma squeezed back. That night, Lily told Richard. He wept openly, not ashamed, not hiding. He wept because for the first time in 7 years his daughter had made a sound. Progress was slow, but it was real. Emma began to point at things she wanted. She began to shake her head when she didn't like something. She started making small sounds, not words, but expressions of feeling. And through it all, Lily was there, patient, consistent, unwavering. The therapists were astounded. They had tried for years to get Emma to communicate, and this 12-year-old girl with no training, no credentials, no money, had done what they couldn't. One of them asked Lily what her secret was. Lily thought about it for a long time. "I don't try to make her talk," she finally said. "I just let her know I'll be there whether she does or not." But not everyone was happy about Emma's progress. Victoria Whitmore had been watching from a distance, and she didn't like what she saw. Victoria had never cared about Emma, not really, but she cared very much about Emma's inheritance. Richard had set up a trust fund for his daughter. millions of dollars that would be Emma's when she turned 18. If Emma was incapacitated, if she was unable to advocate for herself, Victoria believed she could petition the court to become Emma's guardian and, by extension, control her money. But now Emma was communicating. Emma was improving. And it was all because of that poor little nobody from the cottage at the edge of the estate. Victoria decided that Lily had to go. She started with whispers. She told the staff that she had concerns about a strange girl spending so much time with her daughter. She called Richard's lawyer and suggested that Lily might be a bad influence, might be manipulating Emma for access to the family's wealth. She even called Child Protective Services with an anonymous tip that Emma was being neglected. Richard defended Lily fiercely. He dismissed the staff members who spread Victoria's rumors. He responded to the CPS investigation with documentation from Emma's therapists showing her remarkable progress. He told Victoria, in no uncertain terms, to stay out of his daughter's life. But Victoria wasn't done, not even close. One evening, Victoria showed up at the estate unannounced. It was her scheduled visitation, she claimed, though Richard knew she rarely exercised it. She swept into the house in a cloud of expensive perfume, ignored the staff, and found Emma in the playroom with Lily. "Get out," Victoria said to Lily. Her voice was ice. Lily looked at Emma. Emma's face had gone pale, her small body rigid. She was afraid. "I'm not leaving her alone," Lily said, surprising herself with her own courage. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who I am? I am Emma's mother. You are nothing. You are the help. Now get out before I have you removed." "She doesn't want me to leave." "She doesn't want anything. She's a mute little vegetable. She doesn't think. She doesn't feel. She's worthless." And then something happened that no one expected. Emma screamed. It wasn't a word. It wasn't anything recognizable. But it was a sound, a raw, primal scream that shattered the silence she had lived in for 7 years. It was terror and rage and grief and finally, expression. Victoria stepped back, shocked. Lily dropped to her knees and pulled Emma into her arms. Emma clung to her, shaking, sobbing, silently at first, but then with sounds. Little hiccuping cries. Real human sounds of a little girl who had been trapped in her own silence and was finally fighting her way out. Richard came running. The staff came running. And they all saw it. Victoria standing there with hatred in her eyes, and Emma finally heartbreakingly beginning to cry. That night, Richard called his lawyers. The next morning, he filed an emergency motion to terminate Victoria's visitation rights. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, something remarkable happened. Emma began to speak, not in full sentences, not even in proper words at first, but in sounds that became syllables, that became fragments. "Lily," that was the first thing she said. It took her hours to get it out, struggling with muscles that had never learned to form language. But she said it. She said Lily's name. Lily cried. Richard cried. Emma watched them with wonder in her eyes, as if she didn't understand why such a small thing could mean so much. But it wasn't a small thing. It was everything. By the time the court date arrived, Emma could say about a dozen words. Daddy, no, yes, more, flower, bird, and Lily, always Lily. The courtroom was packed. Victoria had pulled every string she could, hired every expert who would take her money, prepared every argument to prove that Richard was unfit, that Emma was being kept from her mother, that the whole thing was a rich man's power play. But the judge was fair, and the judge had seen the evidence, years of Victoria's neglect, documentation of Emma's silence, and then the miracle of her breakthrough. When the judge asked Emma the question, "Who do you want to live with?" the whole room went silent. Emma sat in her small chair, clutching her one-eyed rag doll. She looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. She looked at her mother, who stared at her with cold expectation. And then she looked behind her to the public gallery, where a 12-year-old girl in second-hand clothes sat with her grandmother, tears streaming down her face. And then Emma Whitmore, the girl who had been silent since birth, opened her mouth. "I want Daddy." It was barely a whisper, but the microphone caught it. The court reporter typed it, and Victoria's face went white. "And," Emma continued, struggling with each syllable, "I want Lee." The courtroom erupted. People were crying, lawyers were shouting, Victoria was screaming about corruption and conspiracy, but none of it mattered, because a little girl had spoken. A little girl had found her voice, and she had used it to tell the truth. The judge ruled in Richard's favor. Full custody. No visitation for Victoria pending a psychological evaluation. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Richard knelt in front of his daughter. "You did it, sweetheart," he whispered. "You spoke. You were so brave." Emma looked at him with her gray eyes. Then she looked at Lily, who was standing nearby still crying. Emma walked over to her. She reached up and took Lily's hand. And then she said something that nobody expected. "Sister." Lily looked at Richard, confused. But Richard was smiling through his tears. "She wants you to be her sister," he said, "and honestly, so do I." In the weeks that followed, Richard made a decision. He offered Margaret and Lily positions not as servants, but as family. Margaret would manage the household because she was good at it and loved it, but she would live in the main house, eat at the family table, be treated as an equal. And Lily would be given every opportunity, the best education, the best resources, whatever she needed to achieve her dreams. Lily protested at first. "We can't accept this. It's too much." But Richard shook his head. "You gave me my daughter back. There's no amount of money, no gift, no opportunity that could ever be too much." And so a 12-year-old girl who had once been invisible became part of one of the wealthiest families in the country, not because of luck, not because of charity, but because she had seen a lonely child and had simply sat with her, because she had read stories and offered flowers and asked for nothing in return, because she had loved without expecting anything back. That was her unbelievable act, not something dramatic, not something heroic, just love, patient and quiet and persistent, the kind of love that doesn't make noise but moves mountains. Emma continued to improve. With proper therapy and Lily's constant companionship, her vocabulary grew. By her 8th birthday, she was speaking in full sentences. By her 9th, she was reading on her own. And her favorite stories were still the ones about May, the girl who could talk to animals. Victoria tried to fight the custody ruling, appealed the decision, claimed she was the victim of a wealthy man's manipulation. But the evidence was too strong, and her own words in the courtroom had been recorded. A mute little vegetable, she had called her own daughter. No judge would ever give her custody after that. Eventually, Victoria faded away. She took her settlement money and moved to Europe, where she remarried a wealthy man and tried to forget the daughter she had never loved. Emma didn't miss her. How can you miss someone who was never really there? Lily and Emma grew up together, as close as real sisters, closer, maybe, because they had chosen each other. Lily went to the best schools, just as Richard promised, but she never forgot where she came from. She volunteered at shelters. She mentored struggling children. She studied psychology and eventually became a specialist in working with children who had communication difficulties, children like Emma had once been. Emma herself became an advocate. When she was 16, she gave her first public speech, a room of 500 people, listening to a girl who had once been silent describe what it felt like to be trapped inside her own mind, and how one person's patience had set her free. "I didn't need someone to fix me," Emma said, her voice strong and clear. "I needed someone to wait for me." Lily waited. She didn't push. She didn't give up. She just stayed. And because she stayed, I found my way out. The speech went viral. Millions of people watched it, shared it, wept over it. Emma and Lily became symbols of something bigger than themselves, proof that wealth and status didn't matter as much as kindness, that the people society overlooks are often the ones with the most to give. Richard Whitmore retired from his company when he turned 65. He had more money than he could ever spend, more success than he could ever enjoy. But when people asked him what he was most proud of, he didn't talk about his business empire. "My daughters," he would say, "both of them." Because Lily was his daughter now, in every way that mattered. He had officially adopted her when she turned 18, not because she needed his money or his name, but because they were family. They had been family since the day she sat down in a dusty greenhouse and read stories to a silent child. 20 years after that rainy October afternoon, Lily Chen Whitmore stood at the podium of a prestigious university, receiving an honorary doctorate for her work with nonverbal children. In the audience sat her grandmother Margaret, now in her 70s, beaming with pride. Next to her sat Richard, gray-haired but strong, his eyes bright with happy tears. And beside him sat Emma, now a grown woman, a published author, a speaker who had inspired millions. When Lily accepted the degree, she said only a few words. "When I was 12 years old, I found a little girl hiding in an abandoned greenhouse. She couldn't speak, and I couldn't offer her much, just some old stories and a little bit of time. I didn't know I was doing anything special. I was just being there. But sometimes being there is the most powerful thing you can do." She paused, looked at Emma, and smiled. "To the little girl who taught me that silence has its own language and that love doesn't need words to be understood, thank you for choosing to speak and for choosing me." Emma stood up. She walked to the stage. She took the microphone. "She says thank you," Emma said, her voice ringing through the auditorium, "but she has it backwards. She didn't save me. I was drowning, and she jumped in the water, even though nobody asked her to, even though it wasn't her job, even though she had nothing to gain. She jumped in, and she didn't let go until I could swim on my own." Emma turned to Lily, tears streaming down both their faces. "That's not just friendship. That's not just kindness. That's everything. That's what makes life worth living, and I will spend every day of my life trying to be half the person she is." They hugged, there on the stage, while the audience rose in a standing ovation. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a little girl in worn-out shoes watched with wide eyes. She was 8 years old. She hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since her parents' divorce, not since her world fell apart. But watching those two women on stage, hearing their story, something stirred inside her. Maybe, she thought, someone would wait for her too. And as if reading her mind, a woman sat down beside her, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. "That's a good story, isn't it?" the woman said softly. The little girl nodded. "You know," the woman continued, "I work at a place where we help kids who have a hard time speaking, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because sometimes words get stuck. And that's okay. We can wait." The little girl looked at her, really looked at her. "Would you like to come visit sometime? No pressure. We could just read stories, like Lily and Emma used to do." For a long moment, nothing happened. The applause continued in the background. The world went on. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the little girl nodded. It wasn't a word, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that's all a miracle needs. The story of Emma and Lily spread far beyond that auditorium. It was told in schools, in therapy offices, in living rooms around the world. Parents shared it with children. Teachers shared it with students. It became a reminder that heroism doesn't always look like movies make it seem. Sometimes it's just sitting on a dirty floor, reading a worn-out book, waiting for someone to be ready. The Whitmore Foundation, established by Richard and now run by both his daughters, funded programs for nonverbal children in every state. They trained counselors. They provided resources. They created a world where children like Emma didn't have to wait years for someone to find them in an abandoned greenhouse. And when reporters asked Lily what advice she would give to people who wanted to make a difference, she always said the same thing. Start small. Start where you are. You don't need money. You don't need credentials. You don't need permission. All you need is to notice someone who's hurting and to show them that they're not alone. The rest will follow. Emma added her own wisdom. People think speaking is about words. It's not. Speaking is about trust. I didn't speak because I didn't trust the world to hear me. Lily showed me that someone was listening, and once I knew someone was listening, the words came. They became inseparable, those two. The billionaire's daughter and the housekeeper's granddaughter, bound by something stronger than blood, deeper than circumstance. They traveled together, spoke together, wrote a book together. They started families, became godmothers to each other's children, grew old in the way that best friends do, with shared memories and private jokes and the deep, unshakable knowledge that they would never be alone. Margaret lived to be 93. She passed peacefully, surrounded by a family she had never imagined she would have, her granddaughter, her adopted granddaughter, their children, and a man who had gone from being her employer to being her son. At her funeral, Emma spoke. She raised the girl who saved me, Emma said, and she taught her everything that mattered: kindness, patience, humility, love. Without Margaret, there would be no Lily, and without Lily, there would be no me. Not the me I am now. So to Margaret, thank you for raising my sister, for being part of our family, for showing us all what quiet strength looks like. Lily couldn't speak. She just held Emma's hand and cried, and that was okay, because sometimes words get stuck, even for people who have plenty of them, and the people who love you will wait. Richard passed 3 years later, at 91. He had lived to see his grandchildren, to read reviews of Emma's best-selling memoir, to dance at Lily's daughter's wedding. He died in his sleep with a photo of his 2 daughters on his nightstand, the one he had been born with and the one who had been sent to save her. His eulogy was given by both girls, standing together, their voices alternating like 2 parts of the same song. Our father taught us many things, Emma said. That money is a tool, not a goal, Lily continued. That family is chosen, not given. That love is an action, not a feeling. And that sometimes, Emma said, her voice cracking, the greatest gift you can give someone is just showing up. They looked at each other. They smiled through their tears. We showed up for each other, Lily said, and Dad showed up for both of us. That's all any of us can do. Show up, keep showing up, and never let go. In the front row, 2 little girls sat side by side, Emma's daughter and Lily's daughter, cousins by choice, sisters by fate. They held hands, watching their mothers speak, not fully understanding, but feeling it nonetheless, the weight of it, the beauty of it, the simple truth that runs through every generation. We are not alone. We were never meant to be alone, and the people who love us will wait. Many years later, when both Emma and Lily had gray in their hair and grandchildren of their own, a journalist came to interview them for a retrospective. The world had changed so much. New technology, new challenges, new voices. But the story of the silent girl and the poor girl who saved her had endured. What do you want people to remember? The journalist asked. The sisters looked at each other. They had been asked this question 100 times, and they always answered differently. But this time they spoke in unison. That the smallest act of kindness can change everything. And somewhere out there, a grandmother told this story to her grandchildren. A teacher told it to her students. A mother told it to her daughter, who had been quiet lately, who had been struggling. You see, the mother whispered, all you need is someone who will wait for you. And I'm right here. I'll wait as long as it takes. And the daughter who had been silent, who had been scared, who had felt so terribly alone, looked up. And the first thing she said was, I love you, Mom, because that's how healing works. Not all at once, not with magic words or dramatic gestures, but slowly, patiently, through presence and patience and the stubborn refusal to give up on someone. Emma Whitmore was silent since birth, until a poor girl did the unbelievable. What was unbelievable? It wasn't that she made Emma speak. It was that she made Emma believe she was worth listening to. That's the real miracle. And it's one that any of us can perform any day, for anyone. All we have to do is sit down, show up, and wait. The story never really ended. It branched and spread, touching lives in ways that Lily and Emma would never fully know. The little girl in the auditorium grew up to become a therapist. A teenage boy who read about them online decided to volunteer at a children's hospital. A burned-out mother took a breath and sat down next to her struggling child instead of walking away. Ripples in water. That's what kindness is. You throw a pebble, and you never see how far the waves travel. But they travel. They always travel. And somewhere, right now, in an abandoned place that nobody notices, a child is waiting, silent, scared, hoping that someone will find them. Will you be the one who looks? Will you be the one who stays? You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be special. You just need to see the invisible ones and let them know they matter. Because that's what Lily did. She saw a girl that everyone had overlooked. And she sat down beside her. That's it. That's the whole secret. See someone. Sit with them. Stay. And watch the miracles unfold.